morning and welcome to our political commentators. Today it is Tim Hurdle and Lianne Dalziel. Good morning. Thanks for your time, both.
Good morning.
Good morning, Kathryn.
Lianne is a life member of the Labour Party and a former MP and Cabinet Minister. She ran as an independent for Christchurch's mayoralty in 2013, was the city's mayor for 3 terms. She writes a regular column for newsroom.co.nz. And Tim is a former national senior advisor, consultant and director of several companies, and was also campaign director for Auckland Mayor Wayne Brown last year. Right, Parliament is back, and the key points you're looking out for in this election year, as we were discussing last week, there's been a fairly sort of steady picture or trend in the polls for a while, but how might that change over the course of the year and what might change it? What are you looking for, Tim?
Well, I think the really interesting fact in the polls at the moment is that on most polls, Labour's actually ahead of National, and that's quite crucial when it comes to the conversation that's held about who has the right to form the government. That was something that got people very offended in 2017. So National will be wanting to try and at least draw even, if not ahead, and they've got to get back towards where they were at the last election. And I guess for Labour, the big challenge for them is trying to assert that they are a credible alternative government, that they have policies and are competent enough to do that. That's quite hard, but that's important because if people are going to take the risk of changing a government, they want to know that what they're changing to is a better option than what they've got. So I think there's quite a lot at play at the moment on both sides about who's got the most credible policy position and also can demonstrate competence.
The other key issue that you're flagging there, really, Tim, is whether we get to a situation where New Zealand First might be having that genuine choice again, as opposed to perhaps a more complicated line-up vis-a-vis Labour, the Greens, and Te Pāti Māori. If those numbers do shift, the left's numbers do shift enough, that starts to bring into play his favourite position, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's crucial to Winston Peters, and he has those options. He'll be always have an excuse or an option to say, I want to block out the Greens and the Maori Party, or I think that we need to have a slightly different direction over some of my policy issues. So this is the nature of how our elections have played out now for how many decades. So this is how it works.
Lianne, just looking at those current poll numbers and then what you're looking for the year, the question is whether that good or improving number for Labour, how much of that is driven by protest at the incumbent government, given how awful its result was just 2.5 years ago. The question is how soft or firming that growing support is it not?
Well, I think that is precisely the point, and that is are they able to embed that sense of, a general feeling of upset about the nature of some of the changes that National has introduced? And I always use the pay equity one as an example, which came out of nowhere and took so many people by surprise, and was. It was really one of those issues that nobody had seen coming. So there's more than that. There's the issues around climate, which I still think is a major issue. So I think both parties are going to be looking to secure their numbers in the lead up to the election, because for precisely the point that you raise about the sort of kingmaker role that, for example, Winston Peters has played in the past.
It's the economy, everyone keeps saying. It's economy and cost of living. It's people feeling like any shift in statistics is actually starting to affect them personally. And I guess a key question, Tim, is whether there is sufficient time for the incumbent to benefit from that. I think in the latest Talbot Mills that was provided or came to the hands of media, we may see a slight lead in the right track, wrong track for the right track. And that is an important kind of a measure of where mood might head. Still very slim, though.
Yeah, and there has been a turnaround in some of the confidence issues. The government's poll numbers, however, are often a bit of a lag behind a growth in the economy. So I'll really be looking at the next set of numbers post-Christmas. talk to different people in my daily work, and there's definitely a more optimism and a sense that the economy is moving. The interest rates always take a while to cut through, and I think people are starting to feel that there is more money in their pockets. It's a question of how much they feel that is true and how much confidence they've got to invest and start going. And then there's a second question for a political party or a government: how much credibility is the government, or how much credit, is the government getting for that economic uplift? And those are sort of the crucial factors that will drive the polling.
All right, let's have a look. You mentioned the climate issue, Lianne, brought into such stark relief again with the awful tragedy at Mount Maunganui, but other events as well. And while Parliament was last week debating whether they can even talk about this, we're going to talk about this. It's the human toll of awful events like this. It's also the rapidly growing reality that these events, in terms of cost to property and in terms of economic impacts, are kind of here to stay. Certainly the last 3 years are starting to show a pattern. How much do you think might this increasingly come on the agenda of issues that people are focused on in the election, and particularly when it comes to who should pay and who should help out?
Well, this is a very serious issue, and that's why I've called for an independent public inquiry. There have been a number of proposals that have been floated around, different inquiries. I think the council itself is proceeding with a review. The government is waiting for advice from its newly appointed minister in relation to an independent government inquiry. I think that it is absolutely vital that we get to the bottom of all of the issues, because what I'm finding very frustrating is to look at the polarisation that we see in so much political discourse playing out in a field where we really do need to know what the evidence says. What is it? I mean, the thing that surprised me about Mount Maunganui, and I'd be interested in whether Tim shares this view, but I was not personally aware that there were more deaths in New Zealand as a result of landslides than there were of all the other ecological events combined. And that surprised me. So why don't we know more about landslides? I'm sure that everyone who's stayed at that camping ground at the base of Mount Maunganui has done so in the belief that we wouldn't be allowed to be here if it wasn't safe.
Tim, that whole issue of hazard maps, who's required to provide them and what response they need, again, is this an issue that's that potentially is going to begin to climb up people's lists of concerns?
I think it will. Just picking up on Leanne's point, though, it does concern me in New Zealand how much we have a she'll be right attitude. I mean, we saw that with White Island, where people were putting themselves in a situation on the assumption that everything would be considered, and the subsequent inquiries found that probably they shouldn't have been there. And this is the circumstance of why Leanne's right, that an independent inquiry is really important to sort of try and build the evidence base, the fact base, and see if there's systematic things that we should be applying. Talked about the cost of events. We have got these flood events, but increasingly we've allowed people to build on floodplains. There's areas near me where I go, well, you're literally building that to some map that's on a theoretical model about where the floodplain would be, but it's pretty obvious from the topography and the geology that a big rain event will have an impact there. And I do wonder about New Zealand if we haven't really recognised the fact we live in a very wet country with a lot of quite soft soils that move around, and perhaps need to think about how do we harden our country up at a strategic level, rather than thinking about it as a response to events that come along, which seem to be, as you say, far too often.
AA's move in Westport, which again has particular issues, but it is hardly the only place in the country where the insurers are saying we're either hiking premiums, having exclusions, or in this instance we're not taking on new business. Temporarily in AA's case, as it seems to be looking for more protections to be built in. But Lianne, again, is it finally getting through, do you think, or will it increasingly get through?
One of the
these
ideas,
impacts are now.
I've been writing a bit about this subject actually really for the last couple of years, 3 years, since the 2023 severe weather events up in the North Island. There were multiple reviews, multiple. I mean, I read about 30, and I'm told that there are at least double that again of reviews that were undertaken. Well, where is the joined up review that actually analyses all the issues that need to be addressed? And one of the ideas that was fed back to me by somebody who read my column was, why doesn't New Zealand have a standing commission of inquiry into adverse events? That way, I mean, this morning I woke up to, the Transport Accident Investigation Commission calling for evidence from people who'd seen the events out in Banks Peninsula with the sinking of a boat out there, and I go, well, yeah, actually they do have it for transport, and that's because we have international obligations with relation to this. Why don't we have the same sort of approach for these severe weather events, for disasters, be they natural or man-made? Well, there's no such thing as a natural disaster. In fact, it's about the vulnerability that people have when they're exposed to certain adverse events. So these are the sorts of things that I think that we could do on a cross-party basis. There's an emergency management bill before Parliament at the moment. They've extended the period for submissions, I think, till about the middle of the month, so that people can take into account what's happened at Mount Maunganui. And I'm sort of saying, well, actually, isn't this the opportunity for a cross-party approach that would give us all of the information, build a body of knowledge that would be able to feed into future planning and future events?
Okay. Another matter that is gaining some steam at the moment ahead of an election year, and it's perhaps indicative of how it's going to go, is Winston Peters, and really kind of ramping up the rhetoric somewhat over the India free trade deal. As Dan was questioning the Prime Minister about this morning, saying people aren't being told the truth. Is this, again, just perhaps a start of the differentiation, and perhaps the New Zealand First leader settling on what's going to be a key issue ahead of the campaign? And how much friction is there with the fact he's still in this government and is Foreign Minister?
Yeah, and I think that's the real confusion, is the guy who's technically in charge of the Foreign Affairs and Trade Department saying that people aren't being told the truth. Well, that kind of really causes people to sit back and wonder what's going on. Yes, there's political rhetoric, and yes, he has a different hat, but we're looking for consistency. But this is classic Winston Peters, seeing a niche and opportunity and targeting a particular concern that people will have as a leverage point to try and build his constituency and connect with more votes. So this is nothing new from Winston, but it does really ask the question, how have we got here that the Foreign Minister can attack basically our own foreign policy? Because effectively the India free trade deal is the centrepiece of the government's trade policy, and trade policy is crucial to the future of New Zealand's foreign policy. So it is a very strange situation to be in. Strange, but perhaps predictable, do you think, Lianne?
Utterly predictable, which is why I think I suggested early on in one of these conversations that I was not surprised that Winston took the first term as the Deputy Prime Minister and the second term so that he could turn the heat on the coalition government on issues that he would be able to set out for himself as a way to speak to his base. And it is doing so in a way that I think really does cross that line. I find it very hard that you can distinguish between somebody's role as the Minister of Foreign Affairs and as the leader of New Zealand First, saying that the government is not telling the truth about the implications of the deal. And that to me is just a step too far. It doesn't feel it is not something that someone from a coalition arrangement would do. But it's not just Winston Peters. I think that I've got this abiding concern about what ACT wants to do with the treaty principles issue next. And I don't know whether they are going to try for a referendum, but even the Prime Minister has acknowledged the impact that the bill that the ACT Party had introduced as part of their coalition agreement just to the committee stages, just to the select committee. He expressed a concern about the impact that had had on people in the general population, and I think we're going to see that again during the election campaign. So,
will it have the same impact, Tim, if it happens, if it's revived somehow?
I think that ship's kind of sailed. It sort of was debated and it went nowhere. And there's always a controversial issue has the white heat. In retrospect, people look back sometimes going, well, that seemed a bit much at the time, and we all know where it ends up. So I'm not sure it's going to be able to be reflated as an issue.
The other matter here, of course, I'm interested in your take on this, is why it took so long for the Prime Minister to answer questions about the invitation to join the Board of Peace. Do we think this is a case again, Lianne, where we know the Foreign Minister is very sensitive about anyone going anywhere near his territory? Why did it take so long?
Well, I presume that is the reason for it, which does seem kind of ironic. But I just think that there is, a concern generally at the moment that there is a blanket of fear that sits over, I guess, what Carney called the sort of the middle powers across the world, seemingly unwilling to speak out against anything that the President of the United States says or does. And when the Board of Peace project was actually discussed at the United Nations, it was in specific relation to Gaza. This has now turned into, well, we could take on really the issues that the United Nations was set up to address. So it's gone way beyond what was first proposed, and I don't know. I'm so frustrated with the lack of ability to have an intelligent conversation about what's happening with the United States administration and the impact that it's having on countries like ours.
Is that small target strategy the right one, Tim? I think Phil Goff is doing quite a bit of the sort of critiquing and the criticising that Lianne is talking about. But he is no longer in government. And is the small target strategy the right one for the government?
I think it is. It's fairly pragmatic. It's interesting also with the reality of Trump makes these pronouncements. They goes out hard. I mean, look at Greenland, where we're going to have tariffs on what is it, French champagne in England, and everybody's going to get hammered, and then gets digested and he backs off. It's like quite often it's a big noise and then it sort of backs off. I guess the judgment is, why would we get in his face about that early when we can see where it plays out? And then, I mean, that's where that Board of Peace thing, I think everybody saw it and said, well, not going anywhere, but no hurry to tell him that. And sure enough, it's quietly just playing out as you'd expect. So yes, I know it's not leading the world and telling us what to do, but it's a fairly pragmatic situation considering what a small country are and how much leverage we have in the world. Interesting
example of bipartisanship in this case with what was a members' bill to end or to bring in a modern slavery law. I think a bit of cooperation between National and Labour saw it avoid the so-called biscuit tin. We don't see this too often, Lianne. There have been some examples in the past. Do you welcome this level of bipartisanship anyway?
I do indeed, and it came about because, as I understand it, the government would have been prepared to introduce it as a government bill, but was prevented from doing so by its coalition partner that holds the portfolio, which is the ACT Party, and Brooke Van Velden, who basically indicated that this wasn't part of her particular interest in relation to employment relations. And, given her role in the pay equity debate again, it's probably not surprising. But I think this is an excellent approach and we need a lot more of it. And as I've said in relation to the concept of the independent inquiry, make that non-partisan as well when it comes to things like, disaster risk reduction, planning for the future, those sorts of things. We really want to have as much alignment across party lines as possible.
I mean, it's interesting that this is happening at that sort of backbencher level in some ways, Tim, and perhaps there's room for more cooperation there. That was where the so-called anti-smacking law, to use its very short form, was negotiated as well by Sue Bradford back in the day, one of her 3 members' bills that she had passed. But National may well need Labour, will need Labour again to get its free trade deal through the Parliament.
Yeah, and I think that's important. I'm getting sick of hearing this phrase, the MMP environment, given we've had it for 30 years. But, we've never really thought in New Zealand that a grand coalition or anything like that, which happens in other MMP systems, has been viable. But it's important to see that, given we are moving into smaller parties, it's not just 2 National Labour poles. We've got a more coalition style of government on both sides of the fence, that the middle parties can actually coalesce around an issue and deliver a solution which is probably 80% of the public would be in favour of that issue. So it's good to see that we're actually seeing the maturity to come together and deliver some outcomes that are really successful and drive the issue forward.
Judith Collins' retirement really from Parliament expected around mid-year. We don't have time to go through her storied career and ups and downs and so forth, but she has certainly been regarded as a solid pair of hands throughout this particular term of government. Your reflections on her legacy, Lianne?
Well, I think that she's, played a significant role politically. I mean, her politics and my politics aren't the same, but you can respect a woman who's taken up a leadership role within her political party, and she will be remembered for things, like and I know Crusher Collins is sort of an expression, but I know that she actually likes that expression. But the focus on the boy races, him coming from Christchurch, I have to say that there was a lot of empathy with the way that she sought to address that issue. I may or may not agree with any particular approach that she's taken, but I do respect the fact that she's stood up for what she believed in and done a good job. And I wish her well at the Law Commission. I was the minister responsible for the Law Commission at one point, and had the opportunity of referring the Sale of Liquor Act to actually Sir Geoffrey Palmer, who was...
I read that report many times.
The report is outstanding. Yeah. And people could have said, well, why would you refer that to him when he was the minister responsible for some of the legislative changes to the Sale of Liquor Act that came in when Labour was back in government, when he was the Deputy Prime Minister. And the reason is that sometimes, putting the the fox amongst the chickens is actually a good thing to do, because he was able to reflect on what had happened in reality and look at the evidence that lay behind it.
Indeed, that's a classic example, though, of a very comprehensive report not really leading to a government making certainly not the bulk of the changes it was recommending.
Sadly.
Now, Judith Collins, I mean, will she be missed as one of the sort of more, as I said, solid pair of hands in her latest iteration in the cabinet? Or, Tim, is this more an opportunity, in fact, for some of that talent below that's itching to get its hands on some juicy portfolios and perhaps into cabinet, an opportunity for them?
Oh, it's an opportunity to refresh the image and show that it's a new generation of talent. I think that's always a thing with governments. They need to keep looking like they've got new ideas. Judith's a former leader and was a senior minister in the key government, so this is probably part of the reflection of the new era of politics. Should
they get on with some of these appointments sooner rather than later? Someone like Chris Penk, who's been highly effective in his building and construction portfolio, though, would be seen as a possible contender, a likely contender for the defence portfolio. I'm not sure if there's a space in cabinet for him, but perhaps there is. Yeah, I mean, should Luxon get on with it now?
Other one. Yeah. I think it's now at the start of the year is a great time to get on it. The later you leave it, the more unstable it looks. Now, when we're at the start of the parliamentary term. It's a great time to reset the team and get the bureaucracy pointing in the right direction, because their work programs need to be set and they'll need to be driving. We'll be into election mode very early. If it's like any other election, it will start far earlier than it should.
May start next weekend indeed. Waitangi, the Prime Minister there for some meetings. However, he will not stay up north for the national holiday itself. And very interesting, just reading Ngāi Tahu planning to head north to Waitangi to show solidarity, I guess, with the hosts. They'll be at the treaty grounds. So I'm sure we'll be discussing events next Monday out of this weekend's Waitangi Day, in the political sense anyway.